Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my shelf tours. This is number 32, and it is my ghost stories slash witchcraft, supernatural slash horror shelves, and there's three of them. Sort of I group all those together. So we'll start with the first one, which is all basically anthologies of ghost stories. And the first one here is the big book of ghost stories, and it is the edited with direction by Otto Penzler. He's There are many big books of. There might be about 15 or 20 actually. I first came across them with the the big Pulp's book, or the big book of Pulp stories, which I no longer have. But this one here is quite substantial. It is about 800 pages. It's double columned. It's a nice big floppy paperback. And, excuse me, it was published by the Vintage Crime Black Lizard, original September 2012. And it looks like mine's the third printing of it. And it's, it just covers all areas of, it's done in sort of thematic, but I'm not dead yet, and the old house sort of story, haunted house, kids, there's something funny around here, I must be dreaming, the female, the species, classics, with some M.R. James, W.W. Jacobs, Edith Wharton, Willa Cather, Cynthia Asquith, H.P. Lovecraft, and so forth. That just reminds me, there is one book missing from here. I have an Asquith collection of ghost stories, which I don't see here. I'm going to have to try to find that. Anyway, back to this. So it's a big collection, modern and classical ghost stories. Now we get to M.R. James, the incomparable M.R. James. And this is a Edward Arnold Publishers a collection of the collected ghost stories. It's originally was printed in 1931. This is 1950. 1962, sorry, later printing, about the 7th or 8th printing. And recently, Oxford University Press has put out, I've shown at least one of these so far, new hardcover editions of their world classics. And this is edited in introduction and notes by Daryl Jones. It's collected ghost stories. It's a second printing, 2017. It was originally 2000 and looks like 2013 in the World Classics. There's another date there, but it's the ink of the last letter is faded out. I can't see it. It's got some extra little bits and pieces at the back, which makes it quite interesting. And there's notes here. There's explanatory notes, as well as I'm pretty sure it has something extra in here. This is the one I'm thinking of. There's a chronology. There's an introduction, an appendix. Yeah, M.R. James on ghost stories. So there's an extra little thing in here of M.R. James. Now, this here is M.R. James related. It's Letters to a Friend, edited by Gwendolyn McBride. It's Edward Arnold Publishers, 1956. An interesting thing in here is it was bought in, Blackwell's in Oxford. And it's got, it was owned by someone in King's King's College, 1907 to 1910. It's sort of contemporary with James. Can't really quite make out the name here, but then there's another date of 1956 in it as well. But it's just letters. It's just a bunch of letters of M.R. James when he was at King's College, usually around the teens, in the teens. So that's quite interesting. Here's a little Everyman, Ghost Stories. It's Everyman 952 with a tattered dust jacket. It's selected in introduction by John Hampton, and it was 1939, and it has the introduction by John Hampden. It's got a Sir Walter Scott, Edgar Allan Poe, Dickens, Sheridan Le Fanu, Wilkie Collins, Ambrose Bierce, and it goes through a lot of these have been published, and many of even the ones I have here. It's got an E.F. Benson, Walpole as well. And then here's a couple penguins, newer penguin ones. It is Japanese Ghost Stories. This is a newer publication that came out sometime first half of last year. It's 2019, sometime in 2000. I think it was the first half of 2019, and it's Japanese ghost stories. I haven't got around to reading any of those yet. And here's just a generic one from Penguin, just a Penguin book of ghost stories from Elizabeth Gaskell to Ambrose Bierce, selected by Michael Newton. And I picked this up as a used copy, but it doesn't look used. And it was originally published 2010. And it's got the usual suspects in, but it's got a good chronology of ghost stories. Introduction, further reading, the usual with the Penguins, which are quite good. Elizabeth Gaskell, Edward Buller Lytton, Mary Elizabeth Brandon, Amelia Edwards, Charles Dickens, Sherilyn Le Fanu, Rudyard Kipling, W.W. Jacobs, Monkey's Paw, Edith Wharton, Henry James, M.R. James as well. So it's the usual suspects in there mostly as well. And here's a small little one. Ghost Story selected by Giles Gordon. It is Bloomsbury Classics, 1996, and it's got an interesting little introduction. And it's got by Daniel Defoe, Sir Walter Scott, Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Dickens again, The Signalman, which is the one that's always reprinted, Wilkie Collins, The Dream Woman, Ambrose Bierce, A Horseman in the Sky, Henry James, The Jolly Corner, which was in the Penguin one as well, The Phantom Rickshaw, Rudyard Kipling, which shows up in most, The Quincunx, Walter Delamere, that shows up, Elizabeth Bowen, The Apple Tree, and The Leaf Sweeper, Muriel Spark, which is not usually in a lot of them. Here's a collection of ghost stories by E.F. Benson. This is all his ghost stories. It's a cheap reprint company called Wordsworth Editions. The printing is a bit small, but it's introduced by David Stewart Davies, so it has a really good introduction, and it just has all his ghost stories in. And he's one of three brothers, basically, that wrote ghost stories. There was A.C. Benson, who mostly is essayist. I have a lot of stuff, but he also wrote some ghost stories. And his brother, the Monsignor Benson, I can't think of his initials. But anyway, he wrote some as well. And E.F. Benson is the Benson who did Map and Lucia. So it's a good collection. I haven't read them all. I've read various bits of them. And here's 3 volumes of Christmas ghost stories, or Victorian Christmas ghost stories, and edited by Tara Moore. Is volume 1, and it's by Valancourt Press, 2016. Edited with an introduction by Tara Moore. So they're not all sort of Christmas themed, but in Christmas time it was usual to have ghost stories. So there's tons of them, and a lot of them are anonymous here, and several of them have not been really reprinted elsewhere. There's a Conan Doyle story, The Captain of the Pole Star, which has been done over and over. F. Marion Crawford, The Doll's House, Elizabeth Gaskell's The Old Nurse's Story, and a few others that are Walter Scott, The Tapestried Chamber, but there's several anonymous ones here that haven't been published before. So it's a good little collection, and they've done exactly the same with Volume 2. Valancourt Press, this is 2018, and very similar, with more that actually are not generally republished, but not all of them. Some of them are sort of common. They're well, I should say common, but less common in these collections. And this was edited by Simon Stern, and that's that's volume 3. Volume 2. Let's sort of go backwards here. Volume 2 is 2017, so 16, 17, 18. I have to check to see. I wonder if they put one out in 2019. I haven't checked. But it's the usual thing as well as with these others. Collection. There's few that are sort of in other collections, but not that popular, and some that have not been published before. Now, there's a couple of them here that I really like. I go back to these all the time. Is the Oxford Victorian Ghost Stories, an Oxford Anthology, edited by Michael Cox and R.A. Gilbert. Just fabulous editors, and the collection that they have in here. Again, it's a lot of stuff that shows up in other ones, but these are all excellent ghost stories. I don't think there's one in here that I don't like. And some of the others, the other collections, there's lesser ones that aren't. They're great to have, but this is the go-to one, and it has them all. And there's a chronological of, it calls it conspectus of ghost stories 1840 to 1910, which was published in book form. So this is Oxford, 1991. And then we get just the normal Oxford English ghost stories chosen by Michael Cox and R.A. Gilbert again. Again, these are fabulous, but it's done in 1986, and they're more late. Well, they're all 19th century as well, but they go up to they're into the 20th century as well. I think 1981 is the newest one, and this is published in 1986. So there's fairly contemporary ones as well in there, and this is an excellent collection as well. Here's the Oxford book of 20th century ghost stories, edited by Michael Cox again. I haven't made my way through all of this yet. I usually start reading ghost stories around October-ish period. September, October is when I usually do my ghost story reading. So, and I'll sometimes read through one of these collections, or I will read bits and pieces of them, depending on the fancy takes me that year. So, but this one is sort of set up. I had read the introduction probably last year, and I just didn't get any further into it for whatever reason. I can't remember now. But it's 20th century, and it was published 1996. So yeah, it's exactly what it says. It's all 20th century ghost stories, and right up to, see, the newest one is 1994. So it's an anthology again, as I say. And then we get another Oxford, but it's a young Oxford book of ghost stories. And this was, it's by Dennis Pepper. This was published originally in 1994. And it's got a lot of the same names, like it's got E.F. Benson, but more youthful ones, and M.R. James as well. The Rats and the Haunted Mill by Jerome K. Jerome. Just a hodgepodge again of collection, and I believe there's a volume 2 to this, which I don't have. I don't know if it's the same editor as well. And we've got a collection of chilling supernatural classic ghost stories. Another collection, obviously, edited by Robin Brockman, Arcturus Press, and this is copyright. It says copyrighted, but it doesn't give me a date. It says Copyright Act 1956 as amended, but that's not what I want. 2016. Finally find it. 2016. And yeah, it's just again in the collection. There's no notes. There's no afterword or anything. It's just a collection. It starts out with O. Henry, and then you got Oscar Wilde, and ends with Florence Merritt, the ghost of Charlotte Gray. Again, many of these are ones that are in other collections as well. There's a lot of duplication, but each one has their unique ones. Here's a bigger one. It is 2015 by Head of Zeus. It's 100 ghost stories. And it has an introduction. I believe it's a very short one. Actually, it's not that short. It's about 6 pages, 7 pages long. By who did the introduction? Louise Welsh, who I think edited. She put this together. Yeah, chosen by Louise Welsh. And again, there's some trodden, familiar paths here. See, we got like The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, which I'd argue maybe that isn't a ghost story, but and just H.G. Wells, The Inexperienced Ghost. That's pretty funny, actually. It's quite good. Ray Bradbury, it has Mars is Heaven, which, sort of science fiction ghost story. Trying to see if anything else jumps out. Truman Capote, A Beautiful Child. I'm not familiar with that story, but 100 ghost stories. Here's a Farrago book of Victorian ghost stories, sort of similar to the Oxford one, but not quite as good. It's a bit dirty around the edges, but it wasn't very expensive. So I picked these up when I see them cheap. Yeah, it's got Charlotte Bronte, the usual cast here. They don't give the dates for these ones in here. There is an introduction, which the preface and introductions are always sort of interesting depending on who they do. But this one is by, it's edited by Richard Dalby, but the introduction is by Jennifer Uglow, who is a great writer on sort of folklore and folk type things. And she's written a book on history of English gardening, I believe, as well. And maybe one about pigs. But also, she does a lot of folklore stuff. And here's a sort of second book, volume 2 of the Farrago Book of Ghost Stories. It says volume 2, so I'm not sure if this is... I have to sort of look at it, because that's Victorian. And then this says book 2 of Farrago Book of Ghost Stories. So I don't know if there's a separate one as well, or they're counting the... I'm not sure if they're counting the Victorian ghost story one. I'll have to look into that. And it's edited by Richard Dalby again. Introduction by Sarah Maitland. But this is 20th century, so I believe it might be because of Victorian 20th, and they're just emulating the Victorian ghost stories one, where you got the Victorian, then the 20th century. So it has the usual suspects again. It's got Ruth Rendell. It doesn't give the date, so it comes up to, I don't know if they're chronological. I haven't read too many. I've read a few out of there. And then we've got another one, Farrago book of ghost stories. I'm not sure if this is a duplication, just a different printing. This is 2006. Yeah, this might be actually. No, it's not. I have to look to see. I'm not sure what the difference is, but it's just another collection again, obviously. Here's one that's it's pretty rough. It's very cheap. It's Hamlin, which was a cheap publisher, and it's very light. Even though the size of it, it's the pages are turning yellow. Well, the hinge is cracked there. It's 1977. And again, but there are some things in here that aren't in some of the other ones, hence I'm keeping it despite the size. So that actually ends shelf one of the ghosts. And we continue on with approximately a third of the next shelf with similar anthologies. But I'll be back with that next time, BookTube. Thank you.